Let's bring in our good buddy Arthur Schwartz and talk some food. It's time for the Food Maven. Good morning, Arthur.
I keep waiting to be snowed in.
Well,
and all I get is rain.
Well,
it's early spring here in Brooklyn.
Yeah, well, like I said, I was talking to Arthur. He asked if we had snow, and I said at my house we had well over 3 inches, and the plow actually had to come by a couple of times. Anywhere 2 to 5 inches, depending on where you were. It's all turned to rain now, but nobody predicted that we'd have 3 to 5 inches of snow.
I
in some
know, but
areas.
it's going to disappear.
It's going to disappear, but
immediately.
The funny thing,
enough for it to stay.
I know, but the funniest thing is, after I get into work and after we've got the 3 to 4 inches of snow, that's when the National Weather Service says, "Hey, there's a winter weather advisory for you."
All right. Well, these advisories are nonsense. My phone rings all the time these days about flooding. And I'm at the highest point in the borough of Brooklyn. There's not going to be any flooding up here. So, I am prepared for winter, but that's not happening. However, I can still turn the oven on. It's not too hot yet. I've been thinking a lot about this. My seasonal cooking is also based on the fact that I can't turn on my oven in the summer or even on a hot spring day. But I do think a lot about my oven lately. And it all came back to me a few days ago when I had something in there at 500 degrees. Now, unfortunately, my oven does not go up to 550. My next oven, I have to be sure that it'll go up to at least 550, which is about as high as a residential oven will go. But 500 is a magic number. Let's see, 1995, 25 years ago, my friend Barbara Kafka wrote a cookbook called Roasting. And it was revolutionary in that it recommended 500-degree roasting and ovens and, and high temperatures in general. And to tell you how long ago in food history, 25 years ago was, Barbara's book was responsible for all the roasted vegetables out there. Nobody was roasting vegetables until Kafka said, just oil them up and put them on a tray in a hot oven. And it's so easy. I ate at Barbara's house many times, and I'll tell you, she sat at the table with you while you were eating. So whatever food she made, it was home food, and that mama could sit down at the table with you. She wasn't old enough to be my mama, but she passed away just a few years ago. And I did know her for at least 30 years. She was an extraordinarily accomplished person in general. She went into food, she liked to say, because cooking was the one thing her mother couldn't do. And her mother was a famous labor lawyer. Her father was a perfume industry executive, so she didn't grow up poor. But she did grow up very lefty on the, I'm not sure if it was Upper East or Upper West Side where she grew up, but when I knew her, she had a brownstone on East 90-something Street when it was not at all fashionable to live on East 90-something Street off Lexington Avenue. Anyway, Barbara went into food. I guess I first met her when she did the tabletop, meaning she bought or she commissioned, she was responsible for anything that went on the tabletop, glassware, flatware, dishes, at Windows on the World with Joe Baum and Michael Whiteman, who were the creators of Windows on the World, originally and then in its second life. Barbara went on to do many, many other things. She was James Beard's teaching assistant for years, eventually became sort of his surrogate. He would do classes, but she would really do the classes, and he would sit on a stool and point. and she was a restaurant consultant in general. She wrote a number of cookbooks. Her first one, I think it was her first one, was called Cooking for Friends. And, when Barbara cooked for her friends, you looked forward to not only her food, which was always delicious and interesting, but homey, and Barbara and her husband Ernie. It was really a great place to eat and talk in those days. So whenever I turn on the oven to 500 degrees, I think of Barbara. But I extra thought of Barbara the other day when all my smoke alarms went off. Now, this brought me back to when I was the food editor of the Daily News, when her book on roasting came out in 1995, 96. And I remember that all the big complaint about the book was this turkey recipe, where you roasted a turkey at 500 degrees. And of course, at least half the people who made it, who didn't think ahead, roasted it in an oven that was not immaculately clean. And so, of course, whatever was residue you had in the oven was going to go up in smoke and set off your smoke alarms, which is what happened to me the other day. I'm trying to keep thinking, what was it that I had in the oven at 500 degrees? But I cooked so many things at 500 degrees, not just these days, but for a long time, that I don't remember. But I usually 450. When I'm doing chicken, for instance, I do 450. And that doesn't create any smoke, even in my dirty oven. But the 500 degrees, however, I did cook something else at 500 degrees just 2 days ago, and the smoke didn't happen because I burned it all off by now. So anyway, whatever was smoking in the oven at 500 a couple of weeks ago is no longer there. And also, I think it's possible that Irene, my housekeeper, cleaned the oven. I don't think so, though. We talked about it, but we didn't do it yet. So 500 degrees is a great temperature for some things. For meat that you want to cook quickly, not for long-cooked meat. That is best at 275 at a very low temperature. And there's a whole range in between, and you have to make decisions sometimes about at what temperature am I going to cook this. An oven temperature is an important consideration when you're cooking. So I don't know about your ovens, but my oven is pretty regular. So the first thing you want to figure out is, does your oven accurately reflect the temperature you're setting it for? And there are inexpensive and totally accurate oven thermometers. I like the kind that you hang on the grid. And by the way, your oven temperature will be different in different parts of the oven. So when you're testing the oven, put it in I would say at the top of 2/3. Not all the way high, but not all, middle-ish. Middle-ish is good. And once an oven preheats, at least my oven, and I know a lot of ovens, preheat, they're not really preheated. So I always make sure that if I want something to go into a preheated oven, that I let it stay at mine pings when it gets preheated. But every oven has a way of telling whether the oven is ready. You leave it on for another 10 minutes, and then you can be sure that the whole oven is at the temperature you want, whatever that temperature may be. Of course, I sometimes even put things in a cold oven. Baked potatoes. I don't really see any reason to wait until my oven preheats to 400 degrees to put the potato in. I scrub the potato, I poke it with a few holes with the point of a knife, I put it right on the rack, and the oven is still cold. It still takes about an hour. It's going to be less than an hour, of course, because it's going to take 10 minutes in my oven to get up to 400 degrees. Now, baked potatoes I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago when I was talking about how to make a great baked potato. Baked potatoes can go in at different temperatures. It's not a law that it has to cook at 400. I would not make it too much higher, but this is a good example of what oven temperature will do. I would not do it a much higher than 400 degrees, because then the outside of the potato will become cooked way before the inside gets to be cooked, and your skin may actually dry out so much that you won't be able to chew it. I like to eat the skin. 400 degrees, I feel, is the perfect temperature for a baked potato. Then again, if you have something in the oven that's at 350, that'll do fine too. It'll just take longer, of course. Now, what I was making the other day, 2 days ago, at 500 degrees was pizza dough. I'm playing with pizza dough. Who knew that yesterday was National Pizza Day? Did anybody there know that?
Yes.
It came up on TV, but I didn't know that. But just coincidentally, on Saturday, I was playing with pizza dough. I bought some pizza dough. I don't think I'm going to do that again. I think I'm just going to make my own pizza dough, but it seemed to be a convenient thing. They had frozen pizza dough at my fancy supermarket. And I thought, whatever it was, $3, I'll play with this. And then I just made focaccia with it. And it came out okay, but I didn't place my pan with the pizza in the right part of the oven. So oven placement is very, very important. What happened with my misplaced, you might say, actually I wasn't making pizza, I was making focaccia. I had the dough in it must be like it's a European pan, so maybe it's like 9.5-inch diameter pan. And I just, I greased the pan with some wonderful olive oil, and I pressed the dough down into the pan, and then I flipped the pizza dough over, and I dimpled it again with my fingertips, spreading it out so that it filled the pan. And now it's oiled on both sides. And I sprinkled the top with some coarse salt and some of my just bought and really, really fragrant oregano, Sicilian oregano. And I let it sit on top of the oven with the oven on, because I was putting something else in the oven too, to rise for another time. And unfortunately, the bottom did not get as well cooked as I wanted it to. But had I put it on the bottom rack of the oven, and I've even cooked pizza on the base of the oven, the hottest part of the oven, from the bottom, you will get some browning on the bottom. It doesn't take, at 500 degrees, it doesn't take but, I don't know, I think I had it in there for 12 or 15 minutes. I kept stretching it out a little bit. I didn't want to burn the top, but I could have cooked it longer. But it was in the middle of the oven. So the top got nicely browned, and then when I took it out of the pan, I realized the bottom had not. Now, if you wanted something to cook on the top, for instance, I usually put chicken on the top of the oven, or something you want to get browned, like a gratinée of something, like just a crumb crust on top. Put it in at the very, very top of the oven, because the reflective heat from the oven, from the top of the oven, from the metal of the top of the oven, gives you a more intensity over the top of whatever you're cooking. And then the bottom, won't get burned. But the top, be careful. In my oven at 500 degrees, it doesn't take but 3 or 4 minutes for a crumb crust to start browning up. So I'm very, very careful. Now, low oven is something I'm only recently enamored of, and perhaps it's because I watch Pitmasters. Have you ever watched the barbecue shows? Well, the barbecue guys know about making meat tender, because tenderness is a chief factor in barbecue. If you watch these judges, they really have it down. I must say that the judges in these shows are way more thoughtful than the judges in the general food competition shows. But all the judges in this case are barbecue pitmasters themselves. And so much is cooked at low temperature, not just the smoking part. Some of these smokers, will keep at 250 degrees. That's really a slow cooking. 275 to me is a perfect temperature for braises. And lately, even if it's a recipe that in the past I would have cooked on top of the stove at a very, slow simmer, I put in the oven. For one thing, you don't have to watch the pot. When something is on top of the stove, you have to keep, you have to watch it. You don't want anything to sink to the bottom and burn. You don't want the liquid level to go down too low. You don't want it to cook too slow where no bubbles are coming to the surface. You don't want it to cook too fast where it's boiling, because that'll toughen, the high temperature will toughen a braise. So it's a watched pot. I'm always thinking about Gian Carola Francesconi, who wrote the Bible of Neapolitan food, and she says, when you make a ragu, which has to be which is on top of the stove at a poke, very slow, very, very slow simmer, she said, you have to sit by the pot with a good book, but not so good that you forget to stir the pot every 15 minutes. So that's what braising is. However, put it in the pot covered in a 275 degree. Once you get it to simmer on top of the stove, you put it into a 275 degree oven, you get the perfect temperature, the perfect little puck simmer to make that meat melt in your mouth. There's a recipe, Bob keeps urging me to make this, there's a recipe in my Jewish cookbook for sweet and sour flanken. Flanken is short ribs, but instead of cut in the same direction as the bone so that each piece has a single bone, and when it's really well done, the bone falls out. But flanken is cut across the bones, so you'll have I guess you'd say a bisection of bone of several to, 5 or 6 bones in each slice of flanken. The issue here, why I don't make this more often, besides that it is sweet and sour and contains not an insignificant amount of sugar, is that it's really hard to find great flanken without paying an absolute fortune for it. So I have gotten, I've mentioned this on the air, I've got some good short ribs lately, and I'm always have my eye out for short ribs. So I think next time I see good short ribs, I'm going to have to make it this sweet and sour way, which is so simple, by the way. You do brown the meat, but then you just have it in a pot with canned tomato sauce. Yes, canned tomato sauce, because that's the way my mother made it, and it's the taste that we like. I guess there's some onion in there. I haven't looked at the recipe in the book in a long time. And the canned tomato and sugar, and something called sour salt. And I don't think a lot of people know about sour salt. Sour salt is citric acid crystals, so it is really sour. And it is used in Eastern European Jewish cooking. Well, maybe not just Jewish cooking, but I only know it from Jewish cooking. As a souring agent. There were no lemons in Belarus in the 19th century. Or if they were for rich people. citrus fruit is not something that grows well in the climate of Russia, Ukraine, or maybe there may be parts of Ukraine that because Ukraine is a very rich agricultural country, is very possible that there is in fact citrus there. But citrus was not something you could depend on for sour. So citric acid crystals, which I'm sure to them were really cheap because they were poor people, they couldn't afford an extravagant ingredient. But I don't think it's cost that much. I do see it around from time to time. There was a period where you could not buy sour salt unless you went to a kosher market. But nowadays I see it all over the place, and it sometimes is just identified as citric acid crystals. That's what I'm thinking. Way back when, I had to go to a pharmacist to get that. So, anyway, back to oven temperatures. 275. You should have a slow and steady simmer if you brought it to the top of the stove. Great way to do things like oxtails, beef stew. I was talking about Guinness stew. I got into Guinness stew when we came back from the cruise, which was on a British ship on the Queen Mary. Do you remember that?
I do.
So I've been thinking about it lately because I saw there was a feature on Guinness basically on Dublin.
Well, there's a lot of features because of the politics. Overnight. There's a lot now. Ireland is very...
Well, I don't know what's going on now, but this feature was basically a tourist thing. It did not get into politics. What's going on?
No,
I don't even know.
Just that the major... The two-party system has just been upended because there were elections yesterday, and Sinn Féin did extraordinarily well. Like, grown up well. So they're going to be part of a coalition government for the first time in 100 years.
I bet you no matter what side of the government they're on, they're still drinking Guinness.
I am sure they are. And, the other reason I was thinking of you and Guinness, as it happens, and cruises, is because of these cruise ships in quarantine. And I thought, what would Arthur and Bob have done?
I don't know. And not only are they in quarantine, but you got to stay in your cabin.
Right, and I was thinking about the people on the inside cabins, but they're still getting meal service.
It has discouraged me from taking a cruise to Asia.
I understand.
I am going on a cruise in October, but it's to known places in Italy. It's sold out, by the way. Anyway,
back to Guinness.
So back to oven temperatures.
By the way,
any stew benefits from 275 in the oven. Try it. I mean, everybody's got a favorite stew recipe. So next time you make your stew, try it in the oven, 75.
Well, what I wonder about, because I think everyone's got their 275 is my go-to. Keep it all quiet and let it cook slowly temperature.
Well, for so many years, I remember 350 being the go-to temperature for everything.
For everything.
But it's not.
No,
it's
absolutely.
the go-to temperature for cake.
Okay.
So that's about it.
Okay. No, but I was also thinking about that because my 400 and 425 is my 500. And I just think that, and I feel so risque doing it because 350, and that's 350 was as high as the oven went in Buffalo.
Well, it does make a difference. So to give you one example, I used to do, I still do sometimes, it depends what result I want, Brussels sprouts cut in half, put on the baking sheet at 450, and they get done pretty quickly, like 15 minutes. But nowadays, I do them at 400 for 40 minutes, and it's like eating a soft candy. It's really wonderful. Mm. I'm going to have to get off because I think I mentioned before my phone is about to die. I don't know if you've been hearing the beeps that are coming from it, but it's beeping in my ear.
Okay, no, we're
telling me it's my last gasp.
Okay, well, that's very appropriate for a food
By the
show.
way, speaking, I mentioned earlier that my smoke alarm went off. I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this, but I had to go buy a new smoke alarm. They cost a fortune these days. It's $70, $60, $70 for a smoke alarm. But the previous one just totally went. And who knew that you even ever had to replace these things?
That's what happens. It's the old who knew.
Well, my phone now sounds like a smoke alarm, so I think before it cuts me off,
You're going to cut it off.
Have a great week, everybody.
You too, Love to Bob. Thank you so much, Arthur Schwartz, the food maven.
All right, and you can hear, of course, Arthur every Monday morning here on Robin Hood Radio.